Hello guys, we're now inside the workshop where we have table saws and miters and jigsaws and so forth. And we're in here, stereo speakers refurbished of Georgia. We are one of the largest toys and cameras and stereo equipment in North Georgia. Headquartered right here in Gainesville. We have a showroom here with all these wooden cabinets that hold all the stereo equipment, and we'd love to tell you more about this is some of the older equipment and the newer equipment, but we really actually prefer, my preference is more like talking about the older silver-faced Kenwood, Pioneer, Radio Shack, older stereo equipment that has silver in the front. It's brushed aluminum. It's gorgeous, and we'll get into that in a little bit, and we'll show you some video of that. But here's the newer stuff that's all black-faced. They call this the Black Plague, believe it or not. That all the stereo equipment, when it went from the 1960s, 70s, and it was all silver-faced like this is Radio Shack example. When it changed in the 1980s, when I was in Korea, Japan, in the military, in the Air Force, it went to black-faced. And when it was black-faced, no longer made in Japan. It was all made in Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand. The quality was a lot different. We didn't have, when stereo equipment started out in the 60s, they had tubes. Now why would you have stereos with glass tubes inside? Well, those glass tubes could be replaced. I didn't know that. I learned from watching videos on YouTube about people telling me, and my cousin was into stereo equipment. I love this stuff. I was collecting stereo equipment in the 1970s, about 1975, 76, 77. I get into cameras. My father had a camera. He let me borrow his, I think it was not a Minolta. I got a Minolta later. That was affordable because Nikon and Canon were kind of expensive. He had a Miranda 35mm camera. It was all metal, made out of steel. And so we'll get into that in a little bit, talking about the cameras. But that's what I liked about the 70s and the 60s, is they made things out of metal. They made things out of plastic, but not as much. So when it's made out of metal, it's going to last forever, maybe. If it's made out of metal, like your car is made out of steel, plastic falls apart. It deteriorates. So these are examples of Pioneer, Kenwood, Onkyo, JVC TVs we still enjoy. JVC, when these televisions and Panasonic and Sony, when they break down, our friends over at the people at the television repair, Hamilton TV, had 6 locations in Atlanta, and they were very helpful with us. Repairs of plasma TV, remember those? Big screen TVs. The guys at Hamilton TV have been so nice to us, helping us restore some televisions. They actually would repair down to the circuit board, the resistors, capacitors. Who does this? Nobody does this anymore, because when you buy a TV today, if it goes bad, you just throw it away. So, but there are circuit boards inside these TVs, and the same thing with these newer 1980s, 90s, year 2000 stereos. This stuff here, when it goes bad, people don't fix it. The newer stereos, they just throw it away. But we'll talk about the speaker cabinets in a little while, and we'll talk about how great the stereos were and how big speakers were the big thing years ago with 100 or 200 or 300 watts. And we'll be back in a little bit to talk about the cameras. Okay, stereo speakers refurbished of Georgia on eBay. This is a classic boombox that was made in the 1990s, year 2000. And we love JVC because JVC was so good with their electronics. Even though this was made in probably Vietnam, Malaysia, or China, they're getting into the point that, you know, something that's $100, we can buy it. We can get it at flea markets, garage sales. We can buy it at, there's no trade shows really that I'm aware of for stereo equipment like this with these massive speakers over here that have huge 8 to 12 inch, 15 inch woofers. We collect this stuff. We've been collecting for about 10 or 15 years, longer than the collectible toys. But the boom boxes, and we've also been getting into Apple computers. We like Apple because Apple's really, once you learn how to use it, it's a different software. It's not like Windows. It's a little easier to learn. Apple is good for photographers. It's good for musicians. And I will show you in a minute the Apple computers. We're going to show you an iMac. If you're not familiar with Apple, this is an Apple iMac. You can see it's all white. The ones today are built out of gray metal, gray steel. But we found that Apple, even though it's difficult with the parts, the labor was about $30, I think, to change out the hard drive in one of my Apple iMacs. But the Apple iMac that we bought, that the parts were expensive. They wanted $180 for a $100 part that you could buy at like places like Radio Shack or places like parts stores on the internet that sell hard drives. They're supposed to be $80, not $180. So Apple's a little bit expensive with their parts, but still $30 to do the labor. Very hard to take this apart. You have to have suction cups on the front to take this computer apart. This is an all-in-one computer. This is Apple, this is the iMac. You remember the story of Steve Jobs with Ashton Kutcher about how Apple started out in one of the largest companies in the world now, the most successful in electronics. Nobody touches Apple because you got Apple iTunes, you got the Apple computers, you got the iPhones. I don't get into the Apple iPhones as much. I get into their computers because I like the computers. They can do more. The resolution on the screen is better than Blu-ray. It's like 4K almost. And not too many computer companies. The computers I bought with Dell and Hewlett-Packard and other companies like Siemens made computers. The resolution wasn't that good on the screens. So anyways, we're going to get into the cameras in a little bit. We'll bring out some cameras here and show you more silver-faced stereo equipment. You know, the silver-faced stereo equipment was the stuff that people are looking for today. And now the companies are going back to silver-faced. Here's a silver-faced DVD player from the 1980s or 90s. Why is it not black? Like everything is black, faced in the front, painted black. This is silver because people like that aluminum look, that silver look, but that's not metal. That's probably plastic. And then we get into Sansui and Kenwood and AR, acoustic research, speakers. We like to take these speakers apart and we try to rebuild them. Here's the wood you see down here for rebuilding. We've got saws and table saws. But these stereos of many years ago, like here's a classic Pioneer stereo. When the components inside fail, people aren't probably going to fix this. They're not going to replace the circuit board like it might do in a television set. TV sets today are easy to take apart, believe it or not. There's about 15 screws on the back, and there's all that's in the television set today is main circuit board, there's a power supply board, circuit board, and then there's I believe there's another circuit board on the bottom that controls the vertical and horizontal lines. Now that's not a lot of stuff to worry about. And you got the ribbon cables, which are very fragile, like eggs almost, that you can't damage those. But you know, I've tried to work on the television sets of today with Samsung and taken it apart, and I've taken apart a Panasonic and bought used circuit boards and put it in there, and it worked. Because when you turn on your TV and it doesn't work, it's probably the power supply. You turn on your computer and it doesn't work, it's probably the power supply. But people don't want to fix it. Today they'll just take a TV and they'll throw it away. Because why? You're only paying $200 or $300 for the TV. Is anybody going to pay $200 for a brand new circuit board? I doubt it. You can buy used circuit boards, and I'll show you the circuit board in a minute, what the circuit board looks like. But this is a Pioneer. Pioneer and Kenwood made a lot of stuff, and Onkyo and Denon. Denon makes incredible stereo receivers. We sell all of them. And I'm going to show you a circuit board in a little bit, showing you how great some of these circuit boards made by Sony, Panasonic. The three companies I dealt with were either the Sony, the Panasonic, and those companies like Pioneer. They'd make TV sets and they were expensive. And I don't recommend big screen TVs. It's taken me 2 or 3 years to sell mine. It was fun at the time we had it. It was 47 inches big, and a television set isn't going to be that big. But the image quality in a big screen TV, I wouldn't recommend it. I think they still sell those big screen TVs now. They're giant. They're too heavy. They're too large. They take up too much room. They were $1,000 to $3,000. But at the time, we didn't have projectors, and that wasn't invented yet by Epson, and we didn't have. This was when VHS was out, and DVD just came available. DVD movies, the image quality in a big screen TV it's not very good. You have to turn out all the lights in the room in order to get a good movie image. So then we'll talk about turntables in a little bit. We've got turntables that classic 1970s. Here's a turntable that we want to show you. it's the difference I'm going to show you. Here's a newer turntable from, I believe this was made by Audio-Technica. Now, Audio-Technica isn't usually making turntables, but if you look at the inside of it, I lift it up. Here's an instruction packet. But this is the typical turntable of today. And a typical turntable today, the magnetic cartridges here and the needle here. Audio-Technica is a company that makes needles. They make magnetic cartridges. For them to make a turntable for vinyl records are coming back again, believe it or not, folks. And so the dust cover and the base of it is all plastic. It does plug into an audio receiver. All-in-one stereos, I wouldn't recommend it. Why? Because all-in-one stereos, they just don't seem to cut it with me, where an all-in-one stereo, if one component breaks down, you got to get rid of the whole stereo. So when you buy stereo equipment, folks, just like cameras, buy cameras that come apart. The lens comes apart, the body comes apart, they disassemble. I don't mean to repair it, I mean separate pieces are better. Same thing with the stereo. You get the amp, the receiver, you get the tape deck years ago, you get the DVD player, maybe a Laserdisc player if you're really into old stuff like I am. And the advantage in separate speakers. The advantage of buying separate components is that if the tape deck or a CD player or Laserdisc player goes bad, and you got your wall rack with all these different components, it may cost a little more when it was new, but you can just replace that one component, just the amp, or just the receiver, or just the DVD player. Where buying a stereo set that's all in one unit, it's one big box with everything inside it. This is an example right here of I have a classic all-in-one Panasonic 5-disc DVD player. It's also an amplifier, and it has some great cardboard display up here of what it does and everything. It's pretty amazing. But we've disassembled this, and Panasonic makes great components, don't get me wrong, but this Panasonic component, it doesn't work anymore. And I have stuff here that's from the 1970s, it still works. The way this is built is the amplifier and the DVD player is all in one, but it's not made to last forever. I like things that last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And I've got stereo equipment here that's from the 1976 that I can still get it to work. We can use things like detox and sprays and so forth that'll actually spray into the knob or the power knob, and the contacts that are in there, they get old and they wear out because of high voltage inside that receiver. And we can turn the knob and spray the detox in there, this contact spray, and it won't repair it unless you want to replace the knob or replace the power switch on your Pioneer-Kenwood older silver-faced stereo equipment. But it's a temporary fix. In other words, it'll get rid of that scratchy noise when you turn on your audio receiver. But the older stereo equipment from the 70s, it was made different. You know, people still gut out the systems, replace the capacitors and resistors, and they'll put in brand new resistors, brand new capacitors on eBay. I can't believe people repair 1976, 1978. Why? Because when Pioneer-Kenwood made this stereo equipment, it had 200 or 300 watts. That's a lot of power. And when you see an audio receiver today that says 300 or 400 or 500 watts, that's not 300 or 400 or 500 watts per speaker, per a pair of speakers. That's 300 or 400 watts, 300 or 400 watts divided by 7, so that means you're only getting about probably 25 to 50 watts of actual power inside the stereo receiver. Because they don't make stereo receivers anymore at 300 or 400 watts unless you want to pay a lot of money and go to places like Music Direct up in Chicago and people pay up to $5,000 for a turntable, $3,000 or $4,000 for stereo receivers, and you know, turntables can get very expensive. But vinyl records are back, thank God. And this is a badge I had when I go to the photo conventions. There's one at WPPI in Las Vegas going on right now. It's, you know, February 27th, February 28th, 29th at Mandalay Bay. And I'd wear the badge from that, just showing how much I like these trade shows, the G.I. Joe shows, the Joe Atlanta shows, the Comic-Con, the Dragon Con, where you can get a lot of toys, collectible. Camera shows are not around anymore, folks. They're hard to find. You can find them up in New Jersey, New York, California, but camera shows where you walk into a big, large auditorium and there's millions of cameras for sale, they just don't seem to be out there anymore. So anyways, we're going to pause for a minute, and we're going to show you the next video will be about cameras and darkroom equipment, and then we'll be right back. But we still like the older classic JVC TV sets, picture tube TV sets, and then what we do is we hook them up to Blu-ray or Laserdisc. And the resolution in these TV sets from JVC and Sharp, they had to build these TV sets really good because people were starting to buy big screen, and they didn't like picture tube TVs anymore. And, you know, the TV manufacturers are scrambling, trying to get higher resolution. So I've hooked up a Laserdisc or a Blu-ray to these picture tube TVs. I'm talking about when picture tube TVs were no longer going to be made anymore. They stopped making picture tube TVs because the TVs are big and heavy and bulky, and they require an armoire, like furniture cabinets, you know, to hold the TVs in. They're just too big and heavy. And the picture quality, the square ones with the flat screen, was still a good product. So we'll be right back in a minute talking about cameras, and stick with us, okay? So we'll pause for 1 minute and